Don't sit next to her, she smells like the alley. The laughter hit harder than the shove that followed. Aria Carter clutched her tattered backpack tighter to her chest, eyes locked on the scratched linoleum floor of Jefferson High's hallway. She'd learned not to look up. Eye contact only made them crueler. "She probably sleeps in the trash with the rats," another voice jeered. A teacher passed by, glanced at the scene, and kept walking. Aria forced herself toward her locker, each step echoing louder in her chest than in the hall. She told herself she didn't care. Those words didn't cut. But inside, they carved deep. Reminders that she didn't belong here. Not with her thrift store shoes and the same faded hoodie she'd worn every day this semester. When the lunch bell rang, she ate alone on the back steps, watching other kids laugh, trade snacks, share phones, a life that seemed like fiction. And when the final bell rang, she didn't go home. There was no home to go to. That night, under a buzzing street lamp downtown, Aria curled up on a park bench with a thin blanket, the only thing she had left from the life her family once had. That's when she saw him. A man slumped on another bench across the square. His shoes were polished. His watch gleamed. Yet he was motionless, shivering, soaked from the rain. Something in her chest shifted. Without thinking, Aria stood, crossed the street, and laid her only blanket over the stranger. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his world. And she certainly didn't realize that this one small act, born of kindness in a world that had shown her none, was about to change everything. But this was only the beginning. There was a time when Aria Carter believed the world was fair, or at least fair enough. She used to wake up in a lavender-painted bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, eat her mom's cinnamon pancakes before school, and complain about homework just like any other teenager. Her father, Marcus Carter, had worked for the city transit department for 12 years, a dependable job with health insurance and predictable hours. Her mother, Danielle, was a nurse at the local clinic. Together they weren't rich, but they were steady. They had a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a reliable sedan, and enough left over each month for the occasional trip to the movies or the beach. Then everything changed. It started with Danielle's cough, the kind she brushed off as seasonal until it wasn't. Within 6 months, the diagnosis arrived, stage 4 lung cancer. The treatments were brutal and expensive. Insurance covered some, but the hidden costs, transportation, missed work hours, experimental drugs, bled them dry. Marcus took extra shifts, sold the car, and maxed out credit cards. Danielle passed away 2 days before Aria's 15th birthday. The grief was bottomless, but the bills didn't stop. With Danielle gone, Marcus fell behind on rent. Within 6 months, they were evicted. Friends offered couches for a while, then shelters. Then, when the shelters were full, a tent was set up in a park near downtown. Aria still went to school every day. She still smiled when teachers asked how she was. But every morning, she woke up with dew on her face and the distant hum of traffic instead of an alarm clock. And every night, she prayed her classmates would never find out. Jefferson High was the kind of public school that boasted diversity on its website, but quietly ignored the kids who didn't fit the mold. Hallways were lined with motivational posters about grit and success, but no one looked twice at the students, who came to class hungry or wore the same shoes all year. Aria learned to blend in, to mask the signs of her unraveling life. She washed her clothes in the bathroom sink of a public library and let them dry overnight in the bushes behind a shelter. She brushed her teeth at the gas station before sunrise. She always carried a spare hoodie to hide the stains on her shirt. Still, people noticed. "They always did. Your hair's different," one classmate said with a forced smile, eyes darting to Aria's frizzy curls. "Do you even use conditioner?" A teacher once pulled her aside after class, her voice syrupy sweet. "You know, Aria, colleges really look at personal hygiene as part of interviews. You might want to work on that." In the cafeteria, when kids traded stories about vacations or new phones, Aria laughed along but never shared. The one time she mentioned her mom, someone asked casually, "Oh, is she one of those free clinic nurses? My mom says they're not real doctors." It was death by 1,000 cuts. not the dramatic, overt racism of slurs and violence, but the quiet erosion of dignity through assumptions, dismissals, and jokes that weren't jokes. And yet, she pushed forward. Every day. Because if she let them see her break, they'd know they had power. School ended at 3:15. For most kids, that meant freedom. Video games, basketball, hanging out at the mall. For Aria, it was the start of her second shift. Survival. She'd walk 5 blocks to the library to finish homework before it closed. If she were lucky, there'd be leftover sandwiches from a community group's lunch event. If not, she'd stretch a granola bar until morning. When the library lights dimmed at 8 p.m., she and Marcus would meet at their usual spot, an alley tucked behind an old church, where a group of unhoused families pitched tents and looked out for each other. Marcus had found occasional work doing odd jobs, fixing fences, unloading delivery trucks, but nothing steady. They still called each other roommate, a small attempt at normalcy. "Hey, roomie," Marcus would say, handing her a cup of gas station coffee. "Big plans for the weekend?" "Yeah," she'd answer with a crooked smile. "Sleep in till sunrise." The jokes kept them sane. But sometimes, late at night, Aria would catch her father staring at the horizon, his eyes hollow. She knew what he was thinking, that he'd failed her, that he'd failed Danielle, and she hated herself for the resentment that crept into her chest whenever she thought of the life they'd lost. The cracks in the system showed up everywhere. When Aria applied for a summer internship program, the counselor smiled sympathetically. "You're smart, Aria, but they're looking for students with stable addresses. Maybe next year." When she tried to join a volunteer club, a teacher warned, "Attendance is important. If you're not sure you can make all the meetings, maybe this isn't for you." And when a classmate's expensive purse went missing, security questioned her first. They didn't accuse her outright, they just wanted to check. Each moment was small on its own, easy for outsiders to dismiss. But together they formed a wall, a message that kids like her were always on the outside looking in. Still, Aria dreamed. She dreamed of becoming a civil rights lawyer, of standing in a courtroom and fighting for people who didn't have anyone else to fight for them. It was the only thing that kept her from collapsing under the weight of it all. Not everyone ignored her. There was Ms. Torres, the history teacher, who noticed when Aria stayed late to use the classroom Wi-Fi and pretended not to see. "You're welcome to work here any time," she'd say, leaving granola bars on the corner of her desk. There was Jaden Brooks, a quiet kid from her math class who always offered to share his notes. He never asked questions about her life, and that was why she liked him. And there was Principal Harris, a man whose polished speeches about equity and opportunity always rang hollow. He once told Aria, "We're proud of students like you, who overcome obstacles." But when her attendance slipped because the buses stopped running near the shelter, he threatened to suspend her. The world wasn't divided into heroes and villains. It was full of people who meant well but didn't understand, and people who didn't understand and didn't care. In March, Aria reached the final round of a statewide social justice essay competition. It was the first time she'd felt truly seen. Her piece, about growing up black in a world that measures worth by wealth, drew praise from teachers and peers alike. The night before the winners were announced, she lay awake under the city's orange glow, her heart pounding with hope. "Maybe this is it," she whispered to herself. "Maybe this is how everything changes." But when the results came in, her name wasn't there. The winner was the daughter of a city councilman, a girl whose essay, according to the judges, showed a more sophisticated understanding of systemic issues. Aria smiled and clapped with everyone else, but her hands were trembling. More sophisticated, she thought, or just more comfortable to hear? 2 weeks later, during a group project presentation, a classmate named Chloe joked loudly, "We should let Aria do the part about poverty. She's got first-hand experience." The room erupted in laughter. Even the teacher chuckled before realizing Aria wasn't laughing. Her face burned. She stared at the floor until the bell rang, then walked out before anyone could stop her. She didn't go to her next class. She didn't go home. She walked, block after block, through streets that felt colder than usual, until she reached the park near the library. She sat on a bench, clutching her thin blanket, and cried quietly into her sleeves. For the first time in months, she considered dropping out. But then she thought of her mother, of Danielle's last words, whispered from a hospital bed. "No matter what happens, baby, you keep fighting." And so she wiped her face, stood up, and kept walking. The night she found the man on the bench was colder than usual, even for early spring. The city felt emptier, too, as if everyone had somewhere warm to be but her. When she saw him, motionless, trembling, his designer watch glinting under the streetlight, she didn't think about how unfair life was. She didn't think about what he had or what she didn't. She just thought, he looks cold. So she gave him the one thing she still had to offer, her blanket, and then she walked away, sure that this moment, like every other in her life, would disappear into the background noise of a city that never looked down. But this one wouldn't. This one was about to echo far louder than she could imagine. Elliot Kane woke up with a headache that felt like thunder trapped in a bottle. The night before was a blur. Too much whiskey, too many empty congratulations from board members after another record-breaking quarter. He remembered leaving the gala. He remembered needing air. After that, nothing except for one thing, a blanket. Soft, threadbare, and smelling faintly of rain. He sat up slowly on the bench, confused, then noticed a folded piece of cardboard beside him. On it, in neat handwriting, were 4 words. He stared at the note for a long time. He didn't know who A was or why they had helped a stranger sleeping on a bench. But the gesture, so small, so unnecessary, felt heavier than the billion-dollar empire he'd built. "Sir, are you all right?" a security guard asked, jogging over. Cameras were already clicking in the distance. A billionaire passed out on a park bench was tabloid gold. "I'm fine," Elliot said quickly, standing. But he wasn't. Something profound inside him was not fine. For days, Elliot couldn't focus. Board meetings blurred together. Investor calls bored him. Even his assistant noticed. "Are you feeling okay, Mr. Kane?" she asked one morning. "I'm fine," he lied again. But the image haunted him. A stranger giving away her only blanket, while the man she helped had more money than he could spend in 100 lifetimes. And beneath that discomfort was something darker. Memory. He remembered being 16, sleeping in the back seat of a rusted Chevy with his mother after his father left. He remembered the soup kitchens, the cold nights, the way people looked through them like they were invisible. He had vowed to escape that life, and he did. But in doing so, he had buried it. Now that blanket had dug it back up. Elliot had no plan at first, just a restless urge he couldn't shake. He returned to the park the next night. And the next? He asked street vendors if they'd seen a girl around 15, maybe African-American, maybe carrying a plastic bag. Most shrugged. A few nodded vaguely. One man, a busker with a weathered guitar, paused. "Yeah, I've seen a girl like that. Comes through here most nights. Keeps to herself. Always reading some beat-up paperback. Do you know her name?" "No, but I know this. She gives half her sandwich to the pigeons before she eats the rest." The detail hit Elliot harder than it should have. He slipped the man a $100 bill and walked away, more determined than before. Over the next 2 weeks, Elliot's obsession deepened. He hired a private investigator, not to dig into her life, but to find her. No photos, no surveillance, just a name, maybe a location. The report came back thinner than he expected. Name, Araya Carter, age. 15 current situation, no fixed address. Known to frequent shelters and a public library near Jefferson High School. Family, father Marcus Carter. Former transit worker, currently unemployed. School, Jefferson High. Attendance inconsistent. Academic performance is strong. That last line caught his eye. Academic performance is strong. Why was a brilliant girl sleeping on the streets while his company's foundation was writing meaningless checks to youth empowerment initiatives? For the first time in years, Elliot felt ashamed of the empire he'd built. While Elliot searched for answers, Aria's life grew harder. The spring rains returned, flooding the alley where she and her father slept. The shelter was full. Marcus had caught the flu and couldn't work, and school, always difficult, had become unbearable. During history class, a group of students passed around a photo of a homeless encampment. "Look familiar?" one whispered, smirking. Aria's hands trembled so badly she almost dropped her pencil. Later, she overheard two teachers talking in the hallway. "She's bright," one said. "But college? Let's be realistic. These kids rarely make it that far. These kids." Two words that stuck to her ribs like glass. Still, she pushed forward. She studied by flashlight. She helped her father apply for jobs. She volunteered at the community center to feel useful, but the weight was getting heavier. And some nights, as she lay awake under a thin sheet of stars, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the world was too stacked against her to win. 2 weeks later, an announcement crackled over the school's intercom. "Students, we're honored to welcome a special guest speaker this Friday, entrepreneur and philanthropist Elliot Kane. Please attend the assembly in the auditorium." Aria barely registered the name. Billionaires came and went, giving speeches about hard work and dreaming big. None of them knew what it felt like to sleep on concrete. But Friday's speech was different. Elliot stood on stage in a simple gray suit. No flashy watch, no entourage. He spoke softly, almost nervously. "I want to talk to you about something I've never shared publicly," he began. "When I was 16, I lived in a car with my mother. I ate from church pantries. I felt invisible. The auditorium fell silent. Even Aria looked up. I built my company because I wanted to prove I was worth something," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot the people I was trying to prove it to. I forgot myself." He paused, scanning the room, his gaze lingering just a moment longer on Aria, though he didn't know who she was. "Kindness saved my life once," he said, "and recently someone reminded me what that feels like. Just a simple act, nothing more than a small piece of warmth on a cold night. But it changed everything." Aria felt her chest tighten. A small piece of warmth? It couldn't be. But before she could think further, the bell rang. The speech was over. After the assembly, Elliot requested a private tour of the school. He asked questions, too many questions, about student support services, housing initiatives, mental health resources. Principal Harris stumbled over most of the answers. "We partner with a few local organizations." "Not enough," Elliot muttered under his breath. He lingered near the bulletin board outside the counseling office. There, taped to the wall, was a list of students who had won merit awards or scholarships. And at the bottom, written in small letters, "Carter, Aria, essay finalist." It was the first time he saw her name. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He kept picturing the name, the blanket, the rain. The next day, he called the director of his foundation. "I want a full report on youth homelessness in this district. How many students? What programs exist? What's missing?" "Missing?" she echoed. "All of it," he said. "We're doing Band-Aids. I want root solutions." The director hesitated. "Sir, that's not how philanthropy usually works." "Then maybe philanthropy's broken." Over the next month, Elliot diverted millions from vanity projects into educational housing grants, legal aid for evicted families, and after-school mentorship programs. He did it quietly, without press releases or galas. And still, he kept coming back to one name: Aria. Meanwhile, Aria faced a decision that could change everything. Her English teacher had nominated her for a prestigious summer program at Columbia University, a rare opportunity for students interested in law and social justice. The catch: she'd need to submit a personal essay and attend an in-person interview. "How can I write about my life?" she asked Ms. Torres one afternoon, tears welling in her eyes. "If they know I'm homeless, they'll never pick me. And if I lie, then I don't deserve it." Ms. Torres placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tell the truth, Aria. The world doesn't change because of pretty stories. It changes because of real ones." Aria stared at the blank page that night for hours. Then she wrote about the eviction, about her mom, about the humiliation and the hope. She wrote about the night she gave her only blanket to a stranger, not because she expected anything, but because kindness was the one thing no one could take from her. And when she sealed the envelope and mailed it, her hands were still shaking. Elliot returned to Jefferson High twice more that month, always under some official pretense. A donor meeting, a student mentorship program, a policy roundtable. But in truth, he was looking for her. He saw her once from a distance, sitting alone under a tree during lunch, reading a library book. He didn't approach. He couldn't. Not yet. He needed to understand her world first. He needed to build something worthy of the kindness she'd shown him. In his office, surrounded by glass and steel, Elliot found himself replaying her imagined thoughts. Did she know who I was? Did she hate people like me? Would she ever forgive the system I helped build? The questions had no answers. But one thing was sure. He was no longer the man who had fallen asleep on that bench. One rainy afternoon, Araya returned to the shelter to find her father gone. His belongings were scattered. A volunteer told her he'd been taken to the hospital after collapsing at a work site. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. They had so little, and now even that was slipping away. As she sat on the curb, sobbing into her hands, a black car rolled slowly down the street. The driver glanced her way, then kept going. Inside, Elliot Kane watched through tinted windows, not realizing the girl on the curb was the same one whose blanket still sat folded on his desk. They were inches apart now, their worlds orbiting closer and closer. But the moment of collision, the one that would change both their lives forever, was still just out of reach. It was supposed to be just another dreary Monday. Arya woke before dawn in the shelter's standard room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the kitchenette. She hadn't slept. Not really. Not since her father had been admitted to the county hospital 2 nights ago. The doctors said he'd collapsed from exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition, and untreated pneumonia. A few more hours, they'd said, and it could have been worse. She clutched the hospital visitor badge around her neck as she walked to school, her shoes soaked from the rain. She felt invisible. And worse, she felt tired. Tired of being brave, tired of pretending, tired of fighting a war she never asked to fight. When she reached Jefferson High, something was different. A red carpet stretched across the gymnasium entrance. Cameras, reporters, even the local news van. "What's going on?" she asked Jaden, who was leaning against the lockers. "Some billionaires here. Big announcement or something. Principal Harris said it's mandatory." Arya sighed. Another speech about hard work from someone who'd never had to choose between dinner and rent. She had no patience for it. Not today. The gymnasium was packed. Students, teachers, and even a few parents filled the bleachers. Banners reading Future Leaders Initiative hung from the rafters. At the center of the stage stood Elliot Kane, composed but visibly uneasy, as if carrying the weight of something far heavier than money. Principal Harris beamed beside him, rehearsed pride radiating from his smile. "Students," Harris announced into the microphone, "we are honored today to welcome one of the nation's most influential innovators and philanthropists. Mr. Kane's company employs tens of thousands of people, and his foundation has transformed lives worldwide. Please welcome Elliot Kane." Applause thundered. Phones lifted into the air. Arya clapped once, mechanically, and folded her arms. Elliot stepped up to the podium. For a moment he said nothing. Just scanned the crowd, rows of bright faces, folded arms, anxious eyes. And somewhere near the back, a girl in a faded hoodie is trying to disappear. "I've given a lot of speeches," he began quietly. "Talks about success, innovation, leadership. But none of those words matter today. Because the truth is, I forgot where I came from." The gym fell silent. Even the restless murmurs from the back stopped. "When I was 16, he continued, I was homeless. My mother and I lived in a car. I studied by flashlight. I lied to friends about where I lived. And I promised myself that if I ever made it out, I'd never look back." He took a deep breath. "But I was wrong. Because looking back is the only way to move forward." Elliot reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded piece of fabric, thin, frayed, and faintly stained. Arya's breath caught in her chest. "This," he said, holding it up for the crowd to see, "is a blanket. It's not worth much. But 2 weeks ago, I woke up on a park bench in the middle of the night, cold, alone, and ashamed of what I'd become. And this blanket was covering me." Whispers rippled through the gym. Teachers exchanged glances. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. "It was given to me by someone who had almost nothing," Elliot continued, his voice trembling now. "Someone who didn't know who I was. Someone who asked for nothing in return. And that act of kindness changed my life." He scanned the room again, and this time his eyes locked on hers. "I found out who she is," he said. "And she's sitting right here among you." Every head turned. Dozens of eyes landed on Arya. Her body froze. She felt heat flood her cheeks as whispers grew louder. She didn't know I'd find her. She didn't care. She just chose kindness. And today, I want to talk about what that means. Because we live in a society that rewards wealth and punishes struggle. That ignores brilliance because it doesn't come wrapped in privilege. The room was dead silent. Even Principal Harris shifted uncomfortably. Elliot stepped away from the podium and addressed the room directly, his voice gaining strength. "How many of you have judged someone without knowing their story? How many of you have laughed, whispered, or turned away because it was easier than caring?" The question hung in the air like a blade. No one answered. No one moved. I did for years. I built companies, wrote checks, gave speeches, but I forgot about the people who live in the shadows of those buildings. People like the girl who gave me this blanket. He turned back to Arya. "Arya Carter, would you please stand?" Her legs felt like stone, but slowly she rose. A hush swept the gym. "This young woman is one of the bravest, most compassionate, most resilient people I've ever known," Elliot said. "And she represents thousands of others whose potential is being crushed by a system that was never built for them." He faced the crowd. "And that ends today." Elliot gestured to the banners around the gym. "I'm here to announce a new initiative, one that's not about charity but justice. The Kane Scholars Program will provide full tuition, housing, mentorship, and support for students experiencing homelessness or poverty. Starting today, no one in this district will have to choose between survival and their future." A gasp rippled through the audience. Teachers clapped. Some students even stood, but Elliot wasn't finished. "And the very first recipient," he said, turning back to Arya, "is you." The gym erupted. Applause, cheers, even tears. Jaden leapt to his feet, clapping furiously. Ms. Torres covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Arya stood there, trembling, overwhelmed. "Me?" she thought. "They're all looking at me." But amid the chaos, her eyes met Elliot's. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about a scholarship. It was about someone seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. After the ceremony, Principal Harris hurried over, shaking Elliot's hand with forced enthusiasm. "Mr. Kane, this is an incredible gesture. Jefferson High is truly honored." "Save it," Elliot interrupted, his voice cold. "You have students sleeping on sidewalks and you didn't even know their names. That's not honor, that's failure." Harris swallowed hard. We do what we can with the resources." "No," Elliot cut him off. "You do what's easy. Starting today, that changes." It was a public shaming wrapped in a polite exchange, but every teacher and student in earshot understood the message. The system had been exposed. As the crowd began to disperse, Arya approached Elliot slowly. Her voice shook. "It was just a blanket," he smiled. "No, Arya, it was a lifeline. I didn't think anyone would notice." "I noticed," he said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure the world notices too." She blinked back tears. "Thank you." "No," Elliot replied softly. "Thank you." And for the first time since her mother's death, Arya felt something she hadn't felt in years. The next few weeks felt surreal, like stepping into a life Arya had only ever dreamed of. The whispers in the hallway weren't mocking anymore. They were curious, respectful, even admiring. Students who once snickered when she passed now held doors open for her. Teachers who had overlooked her began asking about her opinions, her ambitions, her story. It wasn't that everything magically changed overnight. The same cracks in the system remained, but now people saw them. Now, no one could pretend they didn't exist. Local news outlets ran the story for days. Teens' act of kindness inspires billionaire's education revolution. Social media exploded. People shared her essay, her photo, her story. Hashtags trended. Donations poured in from strangers across the country, and through it all, Araya stayed grounded. "I'm not special," she told a reporter once. "I just did what I hope anyone would do. If you have something, even something small, and someone else needs it more, you give." When Marcus was discharged from the hospital, he insisted on attending the small ceremony where Araya officially received her Kane Scholars Award. He stood beside her on the stage, his arm around her shoulder, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I thought I'd failed my daughter," he admitted, tears streaking his weathered face. "But the truth is she never needed saving. She was the light guiding me." The crowd rose to its feet. Araya hugged her father tightly, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe, like the world was finally shifting beneath her feet in the right direction. Elliot, too, was not the same man who had fallen asleep on that park bench. He now visits Jefferson High regularly, not as a speaker or donor, but as a mentor. He funded programs across the city that offered legal support to evicted families, job training to struggling parents, and emergency housing to students like Araya. But more importantly, he listened. He sat in classrooms and cafeterias hearing stories that statistics never captured. And every time he saw Araya, now smiling, now planning for college, he was reminded that wealth measured in dollars was meaningless compared to wealth measured in humanity. On the last day of the school year, Araya stood outside the building, staring up at the skyline she had once felt invisible beneath. College acceptance letters were pinned to her wall. Her father's health was improving, and the Kane Scholars Program had already placed 5 more students into stable housing. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The world was still flawed. Prejudice still existed. The struggle wasn't over, but now she knew. Kindness could ignite change bigger than anyone expected, and that knowledge was enough to carry her forward. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the city, a future was waiting. And for the first time, Araya believed it belonged to her. In a world obsessed with power, wealth, and status, it's easy to forget that the most transformative acts are often the smallest. A shared meal, a kind word, a threadbare blanket on a cold night. Araya Carter didn't have much. In fact, by every societal metric, she had nothing. But in giving what little she did have, she reminded a man who had everything what it truly meant to be human. That's the hidden power of compassion. It doesn't just help the person receiving it. It changes the one who gives it and the one who witnesses it. It exposes the cracks in our systems, the biases in our hearts, and the false hierarchies we build between us and them. Elliot Kane's billions couldn't buy the one thing Araya offered freely, humanity without condition. And because of that, her simple gesture rippled outward, reshaping lives, rewriting futures, and redefining what success really means. So ask yourself, in your workplace, your school, your neighborhood, how many people around you are fighting invisible battles? How many are slipping through the cracks while the rest of the world looks away? And if you had the chance to offer warmth and in any form, would you take it? Because the truth is, change doesn't begin with grand gestures. It starts with moments like Araya's, quiet, unassuming, and profoundly human. What if this happened in your city? What if you were the one lying on that bench or the one holding the blanket? Please tell us what you'd do and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness, no matter how small, can change everything.